Welcome everyone. Just as you come in, if you can mute yourself, that would be fantastic. And also just easier and to also just turn your video off too. We'll just spotlight the presenters. Thank you. We'll just give another minute for everyone to come in. Those who are just entering, if you can help just muting yourself and turning your video off, that would be great, please. Okay, we'll make a start. We've got a lot to get through. No ranga okutupuna e tipu aki o ki tamaki makoto. No reira ka mihi ki te manga ko mangakiki. Me te moana ko Waitemata. Ko Ngāti Aotearoa te iwi. Ko Vicky Watson tōku ingoa. Ko taku mahi ki Aotearoa Circle ko te Chief Executive. Morena, good morning and welcome to the final Circle webinar for the year. This morning we are focusing on our TNFD bootcamp. I have seen a couple of people coming in onto the call who I'd like to acknowledge. Firstly, welcome to our founding guardian, Vicky Robertson, and also welcome to all our leading partners on the call. Thank you for coming on board and stepping up to the additional programs, and of course a warm welcome to our partners and guests joining today. If I can just ask if you're coming in to just press mute and your video off at this stage, that would be great, please. And I'll just say bless you. I think someone's sneezing there in the background. So it's fair to say things are moving in the world of TNFDs, a task force for nature-related financial disclosures. It's been said many times that TCFDs took around 10 years to be raised as a concept and then to flow through to implementation. We've been told that TNFDs are going to be more like 5 years. So today is about presenting what we've done, how it was set up, what we've learned, all while building the expertise of our leading partners. We welcome your questions throughout the session. Please place those in the chat. In general, if your camera's off and your microphone is on mute, that's fantastic, unless of course you're presenting. So let's get started with a reminder of the wider context. How we find ourselves in regarding TNFDs. This year, Chapman Tripp released a legal opinion for the Circle. And I think I'd also like to acknowledge Nicholas Swan, who I think's just jumped onto the call today too. The legal opinion clearly outlined that prudent directors in sectors highly dependent on nature for their business model should be starting on a path to ensure the business is in a position to identify direct and indirect dependencies on natural capital, to assess exposure to those nature-related risks and manage those nature-related risks that might have a financially material impact. About 3 weeks ago, Australia went one better. It's probably not something I say very often. Their legal opinion declared double materiality. So not only those nature-related risks that would impact the company, but also the impacts the company is having on nature. It's a pretty powerful punch for all directors in Australia, as well as the director community here. And it's fair to say most directors are still trying to understand, obviously, what that means for them. Why we're mentioning these legal opinions is, of course, that it sets context for the TNFD capability bootcamp. Given more pressure is coming from governance on the directors, how can we ensure that management and reporting units have a better understanding of how to locate, evaluate, assess, and address those risks? I'm sure PwC will make some reference to that too. So any questions, please put in the chat, and also see our website to download that legal opinion. I'm assuming that that has already made its way into your board papers already, but please have a look at it. So that's the background. Let's look at where we are today. All 9 of the Circle's leading partners sent senior staff to take part in the boot camps, which started in March this year. And those boot camps have just concluded. They were run by the team at PwC, and it's my pleasure to introduce a couple of them now. Camden Howard, Senior Manager of Sustainability, Climate and Nature, and Electra Scott, Associate for Sustainability, Climate and Nature. Over to you, PwC team.
Thank you so much, Vicky, and tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mihi nui ki a koutou, ko Camden Howard tōku ingoa. And firstly, apologies from our partner, Annabelle Charteris, who's sick today. She would love to have been here. But alongside Annabelle, myself and my colleague, Electra, who's on the call as well, we lead our nature work here at PwC as part of our sustainability, climate and nature team. And we've also been working on the TNFD bootcamp series for most of the past year. So hoping to be able to provide some insights for you here today. Next slide, please. So as Vicky sort of mentioned in her introduction, this is a super exciting and fast-moving space, nature as it relates to the business world. We're going to cover off a bit of the global context, so why and how nature is becoming such a key consideration for organisations. We're going to quickly go over sort of the TNFD framework itself and its LEAP nature assessment approach. And then we'll detail kind of what we did and what we learned throughout that TNFD bootcamp workshop series. Next slide, please. So, why should we and why must we take action for nature now? I suppose to put it simply, it's urgent. For people and communities, it's urgent, and for businesses, it's urgent. The world signed up to a goal of halting and reversing nature loss by 2030, and New Zealand signed up to that too. So to have any chance of meeting that, we need a lot more action now. And for those that are sort of currently worried about working on responses to climate change, I think we need to also recognise that climate and nature are inextricably linked. And also important to recognise that doing better for nature is not just an altruistic business decision for nature. There's a large element there of self-interest. We are very dependent on nature. So we're going to cover off here some of the key drivers that we're seeing that are really elevating and making action on nature now so important. Next slide, thanks. So nature loss causes massive risks and also opportunities for businesses, not just now, but into the future. Earlier this year, we, as PwC, launched the Centre for Nature Positive Business, and as part of that, we released a report around managing nature risks. And so what that found was that over 55% of global GDP is highly or moderately dependent on nature, and I'm sure a lot of you in the room will be acutely aware of your own business's dependence on nature. Next slide, thanks. In New Zealand, 13 out of our top 20 export markets are highly dependent on nature. So it's over 70% of our export earnings. As a resource-based economy with a clean, green brand, I suppose, we need to be very cognizant and careful of how we manage these taonga, not just to support our economy, but to support our way of life and our culture that we value so much here in New Zealand. But the story is that nature is in trouble here, and unfortunately, wetlands, for example, just to pick one ecosystem, have declined by about 90% since people arrived, and they're critical ecosystems for improving water quality, mitigating flooding, and sequestering carbon. So, in response to that, national strategy, policies, and targets even have started to evolve really, really quickly. in recent years, in the last few years. So just some examples of that around how that landscape is changing. We have Te Mana o Te Taio, so New Zealand's biodiversity strategy that sets our strategic direction, and it also has a range of outcomes, objectives, and then specific goals set for 2025, 2030, and 2050. And I know that DOC and MFE are working after that agreement, the Global Biodiversity Framework Agreement at COP15, working to implement those goals and bake those into the implementation plan for our biodiversity strategy as well. We have the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, so that's a sort of direction for councils to protect and maintain Indigenous biodiversity. That requires at least no further reduction in biodiversity nationally. And then we have the Natural and Built Environment Act, so that's the main replacement for the RMA, which talks about mandatory targets needing to be set and environmental limits being set. So a lot of change in that regulatory and sort of national strategy space. And if we jump to the next slide, Vicky, as you mentioned, we at PwC as well are hearing a lot from directors and exec teams who've seen this opinion. It's well and truly on their radar. It's, as you say, Vicky, it's in the board packs. The IODs promoted it, and it's starting to elevate and accelerate those conversations. And if you sort of couple that with the fact that Australia released their opinion recently as well, it really does provide, I suppose, another urgent lever for change in this space. Just jump to that next slide. So nature very much entered the business agenda after climate, but it's following a much quicker path to adoption and development. So that importance of nature that we've outlined here, it's really driving the development of new policies, reporting standards, and frameworks. And there's a few of the sort of more high profile, I suppose, examples on this page here, and sort of looking at the most recent ones. This year, we had the European Union's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive released. That includes reporting on nature and biodiversity, and the reporting standards that sit under that, some of those are mandatory and will start to impact on New Zealand businesses, even if they're not based in the EU. They're relevant if your business has suppliers and customers operating out of there. And we're already hearing of impacts coming from that, much more requests for information, particularly around nature here from New Zealand businesses. There's the Science Based Targets Network. So again, this year they released their first version of the Science Based Targets for Nature with some initial guidance for land and freshwater metrics and targets. There's much more of that to come as well with ocean and biodiversity. And of course, climate's already there in terms of the Science Based Targets Initiative. And then there's also the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which I'll go into more detail on now. So we just jump to those next slides, Ellie. Thank you. So while I suppose on the surface, this is very much a risk management and disclosure framework, it has a really lofty goal and purpose behind it, and that's to divert financial flows globally towards nature positive outcomes. So obviously a hefty goal, a necessary goal, and an urgent goal if we're going to sort of meet these global targets that we've set for 2030 particularly. It's currently voluntary, although, as we saw at COP15, there's significant global support and pressure for mandatory nature-related disclosures. And as I said, with the CSRD in Europe, that's already coming. It takes its inspiration and its approach from the TCFD. So for those of you who are familiar with climate reporting, I imagine almost everyone on the call here is, it uses those same 4 pillars at its base. So governance, strategy, risk and impact management, and metrics and targets. Very much market-led initiative. And I suppose after 2 years or so of development, it's gone through multiple iterations, a lot of testing. PwC globally been involved in that as part of the Data Catalysts working group. And it officially launched in September this year. I think we had one of the beta versions launched the day after our first workshop. So we pivoted a bit on some of our content following that, and then we had the version 1 released, I think, the night before one of our last workshops. So we've sort of been adapting as this has been moving, and it has moved a bit and certainly improved from our perspective. There's about a 5-year expectation that the TNFD set in terms of organisations starting now to be able to build that internal capability and capacity and systems to be able to undertake a sort of full value chain assessment. It is complex. So I suppose just broadly to cover off the disclosure framework itself, as I said, same 4 pillars as TCFD, 11 disclosures that have been pulled almost straight through from the TCFD, but very much adapted for the nature context. And then 3 new disclosures added. So firstly around engagement, and that was one we were really pleased to see move and be elevated, I suppose, into that governance pillar, having a specific focus and prioritisation on Indigenous peoples and local communities, and also delving into things like human rights policies for organisations. Then there's the sensitive locations. So that's, I suppose, how to, but nature being very location specific, less so than much more so than climate, I suppose. Sensitive locations disclosure sort of talks about how we've gone through the process of understanding our interface with those sensitive locations in terms of where the business and value chain operate. And then the third one being value chain. So that's an addition to the TCFD. So the wider framework very much talks to those disclosure recommendations. It has a bunch of core concepts and definitions that help with standardization, along with a whole bunch of guidance around that, for example, sort of sector-specific support. And then the other part of that wider framework is the nature assessment approach, which is LEAP, which I'll speak to now. So this is still very much voluntary guidance from TNFD to help with preparing a disclosure, and it supports organisations to understand their nature-related impacts, dependencies, risks and opportunities. And I suppose, having been through the process over the last sort of 9 months, regardless of whether your organisation intends to make a nature-related disclosure or even a TNFD disclosure, LEAP still is a very important internal process for understanding nature in your business. And I imagine you'll hear a bit more about that from the participants later. So it talks about locating your interface with nature, evaluating your priority impacts and dependencies, assessing your most material risks and opportunities relating to nature, and then sort of most importantly, where the rubber hits the road, preparing how to respond, not just to report, but preparing how to respond, what the strategic response and change in your organization will be because of what you've found. So I won't go too deep into it now. There is a lot of detail available on this framework from the official release in September. A lot of comprehensive guidance was made available. Those disclosure recommendations, sort of a getting started guide, comprehensive guidance on the LEAP approach, and then also additional guidance on sectors, biomes, target setting, scenario analysis, and also engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities. Just a note on the sector guidance, there's only guidance available currently for financial institutions, but there is more that's out for discussion and consultation right now that will provide more detail for those in the room outside of the financial sector. So the workshop series. So just jumping into that next slide, Ellie, the first thing I wanted to say was a big mihi to all of the participants. This was exciting. It was challenging. We feel it was really important mahi to do. Also want to thank Mātua Joe Harawira, so that's from Te Papa Whai, Department of Conservation, for his wisdom and guidance, particularly at the start of the process, and to Lara Taylor from Oho. So she worked with us throughout and had invaluable contributions in Mātauranga to support the work stream. So thank you to everyone in the room. We know it was a lot of work, challenging work, but appreciate your input and collaboration. So really the purpose was to support organisations with how we would apply TNFD here at Aotearoa. we recognized early on this was going to be about progress, not perfection. We focused mainly on upskilling in the LEAP nature assessment process and held 9 workshops in total between March and October. It was a collaborative process, so organisations shared their learnings together, their challenges. We also explored how Te Ao Māori could guide the application of this framework, this global framework, in our unique New Zealand context. So just next slide there, Ellie. In terms of the TNFD's guidance here, they very much recognise that meaningful engagement with Indigenous peoples a key part of your sort of nature-related issue identification and assessment. But I suppose from the outset of the bootcamp, and thanks to Vicky for setting us this challenge, we wanted to go a lot further than just engagement. We wanted to recognise that Māori worldviews, knowledge and culture were critical ways to understand and also to protect nature. So we explored how Te Ao Māori and wisdom could guide this nature assessment process here while using the TNFD framework. And we did this in sort of 3 key ways, I suppose. We had wisdom from Kaumātua brought into that workshop series. We built Te Ao Māori capability into the core of our delivery team. And I mentioned Lara Taylor, who was involved every step of the way. And then we encouraged participants as well, who were able to involve their own internal Māori team members and cultural advisors throughout the series, so that we sort of had that 3-pronged approach to build that. It was not perfect. We know there's a lot more to be explored here, but we do think it was a really valuable part of that process. So going into some more specifics, we sort of figured going through it, the framework can be quite difficult to understand in isolation. So we wanted to create a case study to help guide participants through that LEAP assessment approach. We created a fictional forestry case study, Ngā Here. Given it's so early in the TNFD's lifetime, there aren't a lot of examples out there of organisations who have done this deeply and well. So what we were doing was trying to use this to guide participants through the process. So we started off with a scoping back, limiting the scope to just our direct operations, not our supply chain. And that is an important part of LEAP, is starting where you think you can achieve some early wins. We looked at our interface with nature for those sites. We identified the integrity and importance of those ecosystems, and then we created a priority list of key sort of operational locations to go through the assessment. Next slide there, Ellie. So in Evaluate, we looked at our priority impacts and dependencies. We looked at the activities. We looked at some of the, external tools available to help us drill into those, tools like Encore, to get a high-level view on impacts and dependencies for our forestry-related activities. And then we sat down, I suppose fictionally, with our stakeholders, our internal site managers and stakeholders, to test and validate those findings. Next slide. We also looked at developing our impact and dependency pathways to really understand how, I suppose, changes to the state of nature or to ecosystem services from our activities could then affect the business. And then the impacts to society also that came from those. So that sort of double materiality concept that Vicky mentioned. Next slide. So in the assess phase, we really here it's about honing what are your most material risks and opportunities, and then starting to describe them and bring them into your own enterprise risk management framework. So doing that while aligning with the TNFD's criteria, but also importantly building that into internal processes. Next slide, please. And then finally, we looked to prepare and respond. Just jump to that next slide. Thanks, Ellie. And so our final phase was looking at our response. So we used frameworks like the Science-Based Targets Network's ART3 framework. So that's about avoiding first, reducing, restoring, regenerating, and then looking at transforming our business through strategic shifts. We looked at responses, different strategies we could look at to improve water efficiency and reduce waste, as well as setting science-based targets for improvement. And so really this is where looking at the business response to the risks and opportunities that we've identified is the critical part to start taking action for nature. So what did we learn? And I'm going to jump through this really quickly because we do have the participants on the call, so I think it's more valuable you hear this, their perspective on it. But really scoping back, starting with a limited scope was really critical. We found data access, particularly at the right level of granularity, was challenging. So we have to rely quite a bit on much more subjective or qualitative assessments. We did find that learning from our climate journey, so understanding the processes we'd set up internally for climate reporting is very useful in this process because of the similarities in the frameworks. And engaging both with internal and external stakeholders throughout the process was key. And that when it came to things like enterprise risk management processes, that takes time, but those internal conversations need to start, well ahead of when that risk and opportunity register needs to go to the board. And very much this is an ongoing process that it will take several years to build up to that full value chain assessment, but that nature really can't wait. We do need to start now because it will take that time to build and to respond to the reporting and to the regulation and the market changes that are coming and that we're seeing coming now. So finally, just to end on a couple of actions that you can take, that organizations on this call can take to get started now. Firstly, educate. I mean, this is a new field and a quickly moving field. Ask your board and executive team what they know of nature in your business, and ensure that they're up to speed on what it does mean, particularly your high dependencies and impacts and the risks and opportunities they present. Make a light level assessment. You can use the LEAP approach. SBTN's 5-step processes is aligned and similar. And understand your interface with nature, and then get ready for those upcoming, whether it's voluntary or mandatory disclosures. Identify your data gaps and needs, build your team's capability, and start building nature into your sustainability reporting. So I think I will leave it at there because we've got some great people on the line who can talk to their own experiences. But I'd like to thank Vicky and the team at the Aotearoa Circle also for the fantastic opportunity to lead this work and to be involved in something that is so exciting, impactful and important for Aotearoa New Zealand, but also the world. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou.
Thanks, Cam. Great to get that summary. I think you did really well for 8-9 months of work to throw that out there in 10 minutes. I'm just keen, before you do disappear, to ask PwC, a massive global firm, and what are you sort of hearing from colleagues overseas in terms of the movement there in other countries and how different companies, international companies, are sort of embracing the TNFD process?
Yeah, I mean, as I sort of mentioned before, we backed, I suppose, the direction of travel by launching the Centre for Nature Positive Business this year. We've put a lot of resource behind it internally. We're hearing a lot from clients that particularly in the European and the Americas, that CSRD, the European regulations and the mandatory nature of the nature reporting within them is driving a lot of requests for information and data on nature. So, the LEAP process itself and TNFD questions that it asks are very useful for providing answers to that. Very much aligned. I think LEAP itself is the recommended materiality assessment process for the European sustainability reporting standards. The ones that are voluntary still require a materiality assessment to understand the voluntary or mandatory nature of them. So LEAP absolutely helps to provide that, and CSRD related projects and requests are ramping up quickly, and it's because of the mandatory nature of that, and TNFD and LEAP can absolutely help with that. Yeah.
Thanks. And I think you made a couple of points during the presentation too. And, as you said, it was a moving feast, wasn't it, in terms that the final version of the framework hadn't come out, and that you kind of encouraged progress before perfection kind of approach to it as well. Just want to expand a little bit on that, because it's very hard to hit the ground running with everything lined up and all ready to go. So it's very much seen as a just get started. Is that the sort of approach that you see is the right one to take?
Yeah. I'm sorry, my connection was cutting out a little there, but I think you said sort of progress versus perfection and just get started. And I think absolutely that was the kaupapa, is sort of, we know this is a sort of a marathon, not a sprint, but we have to get started. And it's sort of that almost feeling of it's a race to the start line right now, not to the finish line, but we need to get started. We need to get some runs on the board, sort of build that organizational capacity and knowledge around how to respond to nature, but also some of the systems that just take a long time to move in large organizations. We don't need to do it perfectly right now. It doesn't need to be a formal TNFD aligned disclosure. It's really about building the muscle to then look at nature and all of its complexities and location specificities across the business and direct operations, but then start expanding that into the supply chain and value chain, because that's just going to take a long time. So absolutely get started. That is the one key piece that I could leave with you right now, is it's going to take a while to build this muscle and get started now.
So thanks, Ken. Thanks, Electra. And also thank you to Annabelle and Matt and Lara, who couldn't be here today, but were incredible members of the team as well. So look, let's bring on three of our leading partners who are on the program, Kat, James, and Kate. I think the team are just going to start spotlighting you now and bring you into the panel. Kate Van Praag is General Manager of Sustainability at Genesis. James Roper, Manager of Sustainability, Global Insights and Performance at Zespri. And Kat Rowe, Sustainability Manager for Policy Engagement at Silverfern Farms. So thank you for all joining us today. Kate, if I can just start with you. What were your expectations going into the boot camp, and what has been your most significant takeaway?
Kia ora, Vicky. Thanks so much for having us here today. The expectations going in, I think, I was really open-minded. I was looking forward to, I think, primarily working with peers and all learning together and being able to share the journey, and I guess being kind of vulnerable. This is a new, fast evolving area, as you've just heard from Camden. And while we were doing it, the guidance was changing, and so I think that was great. And I think the takeaways I have, there were a few, and lots of them echo what Camden's already touched on. I think it can be quite overwhelming because nature is all encompassing. It's very location specific. There's different material impacts depending on your industry, different indicators to use to measure, and getting your head around where and what takes a while. But I think echoing the progress over perfection mantra, which applies to the whole of sustainability, I think, really. It's really about just taking a step and then another step and another. And I think an example of that, while we were on the boot camp, we decided to develop our first nature and water position statements, and they were really high level statements, so they are literally a first step. But part of that was about educating the business that this is something that's coming. We need to start thinking about it and being able to express our views on it. And then we also started reporting in a lot more granular detail on some key nature metrics. So obviously for us, water is really important. We use it to generate hydro electricity. You can see in the image in the background our Tekapo power scheme. And so that's where we started. So that's a kind of a bottom-up approach, getting started. And then I think another key takeout, which Kendon touched on as well, is the importance of relationships. So I think internally with all of your colleagues who might hold key information or who will be really important as this journey goes on, your environment teams, community, finance teams, and externally with the communities and mana whenua in the locations where you operate.
Oh, thanks, Kate. James, clearly Zespri, another company connected very much to the land, needing to think about the quality of your natural capital is going to be key. How has the TNFD bootcamp changed things for Zespri?
Yeah, kia ora, Vicky. So the TNFD, first of all, it provided us with a framework for applying a more holistic lens to view our environmental risk agenda. So it's helped us apply a common thread to the work we're doing across topics such as water, climate change, and biodiversity. As you say, we're a nature-based business, so we're dependent on the services it provides us, such as pollination. So any changes as a consequence of degradation will impact on our product quality and yields. So it's part of maintaining business resilience. But ultimately, we want to shift this work from a risk agenda that tends to focus on impact reduction towards thinking about how we properly value nature as an industry. And so that includes supporting our growers with the tools and resources to restore it. I think the TNFD bootcamps really help to accelerate the timeline of this for us.
Nice. Kat, I'm gonna pull you out because I always thought you were the student at the front of the class doing their homework before anybody else, and maybe even some reference to what a typical month looked like in terms of physical workshop and then discussions and everything held online. But how has the bootcamp changed conversations for Silverfin Farms, and even as far as future timelines might go on whether TNFDs is something that you'll commit to?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky, and thank you for asking us to be part of the panel today. I think for me, the process really kind of leveled up our ability to navigate TNFD, like Cam and the other panelists have spoken about. It's a very shifty area. We've kind of known it's coming. We've seen various drafts of the TNFD guidance, but it was such a great asset to us to be able to come together and really kind of understand how that was settling, understanding how it was relevant for our businesses, and also understanding how we could think about it in terms of the gaps or the additional work that might be needed to really best situate that approach for Aotearoa. From Silverfin Farms' perspective, we've committed to undertaking a TNFD. We'll do the work on that next year. We'll either publish at the end of next year or the beginning of 2025. And I think the bootcamp has really set us up to do that in a way that not only just ticks the box, but really represents the kind of gold standard double materiality and stretching deep into our value chain so it can have the most impact on our business.
Fantastic. Public disclosure. I love it. Kate, I don't think, and certainly one of the questions in the chat, any signals from XRB to introduce mandatory reporting standards for TNFDs. We're certainly that, they have to wait until something comes through from a new government on whether that would be mandatory. We're not sort of seeing the likelihood of anything mandated for TNFDs like the TCFDs anytime soon. But what would you say to other New Zealand companies who might be contemplating how they report on nature-related risks and opportunities?
Yeah, I don't think any organisation should be waiting for mandated disclosures to start thinking about their impacts on nature. I think, there's lots of drivers here. Obviously, it's an investor-led framework. So it's really, demands from markets that New Zealand exports into, from, all different jurisdictions and customer and consumer expectations. So I think, just like we saw with climate lots of organisations are, started using that TCFD framework, which helped them to kind of consider and familiarise themselves with climate risks before it was mandated in New Zealand, and that I think is really, really helpful for a business to do. And aside from that, I think we know that our economy, our financial stability, and the kind of broader societal resilience depends on nature, and we know that biodiversity is in severe decline, so which increases business risks, as James spoke to. I think when you consider how much of New Zealand's economy relies on nature, I think it makes sense that every organisation should be concerned with its decline and trying to address that. So whether it's mandated or not, I think there's an expectation, and a growing expectation, that business will be more transparent. We are already asked questions by investment analysts. I've just been completing a survey over the last few days, about our impacts on nature, and so it's that old saying, what gets managed. What gets measured gets managed, and the TNFD provides a framework for an organisation, like Kat said, to look, really holistically at their impacts. Focus on the locations and the areas that are most material to them, and how to start taking action. So I guess to organisations, in more practical terms, I think Camden shared some of the resources that are out there. I think start looking at those. As over the next little while, we'll start to see more and more businesses coming out. So I think look at similar businesses overseas to see what they're doing. They'll be driven by the EU directive or all kinds of things. Page 83 of the TNF guidance, I've had it open since I've been in this boot camp, and I keep referring to it. That's the kind of bottom-up approach. Some of those indicators that you'll need to start disclosing. And I think if you can start getting your head around that from that bottom-up aspect, it's really important too. And just get started, basically.
Nice, Kate. James, global company again with Zespri. What are you seeing in terms of the global markets around TNFDs, and do you feel that this kind of reporting is something that's being driven more by the market?
Yeah, so we're constantly listening to our global consumers. We know a big segment of them are interested in nature, and our market research points at deforestation as a top of mind issue when it comes to food producers, which is obviously the category we're in. But I think Kate also touched on the regulatory aspect. So we're seeing an increasing legislation, particularly in Europe, so through the Nature Restoration Law, which is part of the EU Green Deal. So these policies could have a medium-term threat in our ability to sell products and services that, if they have seem to have a negative impact on the environment. So that's one reason we want to be ahead of them. But then also from a global marketing perspective, we're doing a lot of work promoting the health and nutritional aspects of kiwi fruit, and we see an opportunity to make a stronger link between healthy eating, healthy planet, and so that's an area we're going to communicate more in the year ahead.
Kat, just coming back to that sort of question too about XRB, and the fact that Silver Fern Farms has sort of put the stake in the ground that you are going to look to do some, is producing that voluntary guidance going to be key sooner than later for you as well?
Yeah, I think so. Like all of these things, I think there's a bit of a balancing act to be had, that the longer these processes take, and maybe the more consultation that's undertaken, or the more expertise, especially I think with nature. Certainly one of the things we've learned through this process is just how place-based nature is, and how localized it is, and how we need to, as much as possible, make sure that people who are close to the land are close to the process. I think there's some value in taking that time to make sure that the guidance does deliver the best impact for nature. But in saying that, obviously, the quicker that we can have settled and clear guidance, the better from a business perspective. But our view is that there's enough high level guidance and enough practice that we can connect to around the world and in New Zealand, especially through this cohort of companies that have undertaken the boot camp, that we can certainly do a first disclosure reasonably confidently.
Right. I always sort of looked at it from the circle's point of view, is if enough companies could get into the TNFDs, the opportunity for that New Zealand Inc. story, the brand to the rest of the world, exporting our food and fibre, etc., to the rest of the world, because they could see us taking that seriously and how we respond to that. So, Kat, what's your sort of feeling in terms of being one of the first companies to lead out on that too? What do you think New Zealand Inc. should do in regards to nature and TNFDs?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think James spoke to a lot of the market drivers. We are also very much a market-led company and have a large customer insights program that is delivering us very similar information to what James has spoke about, but obviously in the red meat sector. I think from a New Zealand perspective, we've got to be really kind of deliberate by design. Our nature story has always been kind of core to our New Zealand Inc. brand, but we know that there are threats to that, and we also know there are opportunities. I think we can really work together to, position New Zealand as a leading, potentially the global leader in nature positive food production, but there's an onus on everyone involved to make sure that that is something that we can provide the evidence for, provide the data for, and make sure that nature has a respected role and voice within our business. I think if it just is window dressing, then it won't work. Probably further to that, I think there's a big opportunity for competitive collaboration. Certainly when we're talking about nature, the more kind of shared metrics or shared approaches that we have, I think the stronger the products and the claims that we take to market will be. So I think that's a really interesting space to look at. The other thing I think is just around investment, that if we want to continue to take this strong New Zealand Inc. brand to the world, it can't just be about setting targets and making disclosures. It also needs to be about investing in the response to those nature issues that we identify.
Yeah, really good points. Thanks, Kat. Kate, I'll just do one more question. It was quite interesting when we saw everybody come into the room, and clearly we had a couple of government leading partners in terms of Ministry for the Environment and DOC. But as an energy company, we had a couple of banks, we had another energy company, and then we had some agri, hort sort of there. Did that sort of assist in terms of the overall experience, just having that diverse, or was it something that you would have preferred to have had more like-minded sort of companies or similar companies in terms of the product or services that you have?
No, I think the mix was really great. I think it was good having some similar and some quite different, because everyone's learning, and I think as you go through it and you're thinking about how and what, I think drawing on the experience from other sectors is really useful, and it's really good to get out of your lane and kind of up and out and think, oh yeah, I get it from that, and maybe I could apply that to what we're doing as well. So I think it's all useful. Everyone's journey is useful, so I really appreciated both similar industries and different. And I think throughout the boot camp, obviously we were given opportunities to work more closely with similar sectors, and then mix it up again. So I think it was a good balance.
Thank you. Look, thank you to all our panelists and presenters today, and thank you all for attending. I have got a couple of just last messages I would love to get across, please. We will be running a 2024 TNFD boot camp. So if you do want to be part of that, please get in contact. I think we've got about 6 companies signed up already. So let us know just sooner or later to get that information to you. It's an exciting time. It's a positive change. I feel for the circle, the TNFDs were almost designed specifically for our vision and our work. And so let us know how you're going and what your ideas are in your organizations and how we might be able to assist with that. Please also remember our final hui for partners will be on the 28th of November. So Jonathan Porritt will be calling in from the UK, no doubt probably a bit stressed about what might be happening a few days later and with COP28, but he'll have some great updates and global insights for us. And at that hui too, we'll also be hearing updates on all of our programs, including some of the new ones like the biotechnology work, the capital access that have come through some of our roadmaps, updates on the seafood adaptation, energy and transport climate scenarios, etc. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Mā te wā.
Sure.